Jose Hernandez ran electrical lines for a living. He was an engineer, and he thought the way engineers think, which is to say, he trusted what could be measured and wired and put down on a diagram. On the question of what happens to a person when the body stops, he had a position. He'd be shut off like a light bulb and turn into nothing. He has said he was a true atheist, that he didn't believe in any religion, that he thought the whole business was foo-foo, and he doesn't soften any of it when he says it now. There's a standard explanation for what happened to him. It's called the dying brain. Starved of oxygen, in the minutes when the body is failing, the brain can produce experiences of enormous clarity and force. People come out of them certain they've been somewhere, and the explanation says they were never anywhere, that the whole thing was assembled in the dark by an organ running out of fuel. Jose knew that explanation. It's the sort of thing he'd have offered to somebody else. It was the 6th of January, 2000. The job was routine, and they were running late, so they made the small decision that people make when they're behind. Rather than lower the bucket and raise it again, he'd stay up in it while the truck moved, and his partner would navigate around the trees carefully. The thing about his partner is that he was worried about the wrong danger. He was watching the lines overhead because a man up in a bucket near live electrical wire can be killed by it, and that's the risk you think about when you've got someone up there. So his eyes were up, and because his eyes were up, they weren't on what was in front of the truck, which was a tree. He bumped it. Not dramatically. Jose hit the bucket and broke every rib down his right side, and it was a small mistake made for a good reason by a man trying to keep his coworker from being electrocuted. He went to the emergency room, broken ribs, painful and serious and survivable, and he went home. The ribs didn't heal properly. That's what put him back in an emergency room, sitting on a bed, waiting. A nurse handed him a call button and told him to push it if he needed anything. Then he started to struggle to breathe. He thought about pushing the button. He grew up in the South Bronx, where men are supposed to be tough, and he told himself he could manage it, that he could get through this, that he always did. So he sat there on the bed and he didn't push it. He waited about 45 minutes. 45 minutes of not being able to breathe properly, with the thing that would bring help sitting right there in his hand, because pushing it would have meant admitting he couldn't handle it on his own. When he finally pushed it, the nurse came in and looked at him and called a code blue. He says that was the beginning of his experience of dying, and because he was suffocating, it was slow. He had time to move through the whole sequence. The first thing he felt, when everybody ran into the room and stripped him down, was shame. After the shame came the thought that this might be real, and then the thought of his family, of how they'd manage, because he'd never expected anything like this and was completely unprepared. Then he started thinking about God. If you get me through this, he said, I'll change. I'll be a better person. You won't regret it. Nothing happened. And in the silence after nothing happened, he felt anger, because he'd known all along the whole thing was a fiction, and here was the proof. Then he was afraid. He was about to be switched off, and he wanted very badly to ask somebody in that room to hold his hand. He didn't ask. What stopped him was the thought that his father would be ashamed of him, so he stiffened, and he waited for death. His senses sharpened. He could hear the IV, and it sounded like rain hitting a tin roof. He looked at the wallpaper and could see the grain in it, and he said there was a sense of wonder in him at the same moment he was terrified. Then he noticed a shadow standing by the door. Looking at it, he thought about how hard his life had been, and it occurred to him that maybe it was all right to let go. Not quitting, not giving up, just recognizing there was nothing he could do to stop what was already happening. He thought, it's okay to die. The moment he thought it, the shadow moved. It came around everybody in the room, and he saw its hand reach out and touch his toe. What he felt then was relief, and he wasn't struggling to breathe anymore. He describes a warm breeze, and he had long hair at the time, and he remembers thinking his hair must be blowing in it. Then he was lifted, up and back into the corner of the room, where he watched the team work on a body he recognized as his own. There was a doctor directly over it, pumping, and he could see the stress in her face. He looked down at himself and thought, that's me, and I'm dead. And then, immediately after it, the thought that a man who believed the body was the whole story had no way to hold. If that's me, then who am I? A voice next to him said to think of his body as a car with 5 million miles on it, that there was nothing left to fix, that it was time to say goodbye to it. What happened next is the part he tends to slow down for. Looking at himself from across the room, for the first time in his life, he loved and appreciated who he had been. He was grateful to that body for giving him the life he'd had. He started getting memories of what he calls everyday benign things. Somebody smiling, his little brother's hand in his, a kiss, a child looking up at you, taking in a breath of air. Then the voice said it was time to move on, and they walked. He never saw the presence, so he doesn't know what it was, only that it felt feminine. There was a hole in the ground, black, and they walked into it, and he fell. He says it was painful, that it felt like something was being ripped off of him. When he hit the bottom, there was another hole, and the voice told him to keep going, and he fell again with the same tearing sensation. At the bottom of the second fall, there was color. It was alive and moving, and it was speaking to him in what sounded like millions of voices at once, and he understood it at a level he couldn't explain even while it was happening. Then it opened, and there was a forest. He grew up in New York City, so what struck him were the mountains, the shadows the clouds threw across them, the herds of animals running. He realized he was hovering. When he said out loud that he was flying, the voice told him that's normal here. He thought about his children, and that was the only part of it that hurt. He asked what would happen to them. The voice told him not to worry, that he could see them from there, and he says it was the most amazing thing he'd ever heard, and that it took his fear away entirely. So he flew. Over mountaintops with snow on them, he looked to the horizon and saw the sun the way you'd see it through a telescope, close enough to make out the flares coming off it, and he understood the warm wind he was riding to have come from there. Then he looked down and saw a cove and a beach and a man standing knee-deep in the water. 6 children held onto the man's right hand in a line. 1 child held his left. Jose went down to see what it was, and at 10 or 15 feet away, the man turned around. It was his father. Jose and his father had a very hard relationship. His father drank and he was abusive, and Jose, 7th of 8 children, had made himself his mother's protector. They clashed for years. He doesn't remember ever telling his father that he loved him, and he doesn't remember hearing it back. They couldn't hug because his father didn't think that was what men did. His father's idea of a man was someone empty, without a soul, without feelings. Standing on that beach, Jose understood he was being handed the chance to say the thing he'd never been able to say in life. They had an exchange he describes as very emotional. He came away understanding that his father loved him and believing his father understood the same about him. His father told him he had to go back. Jose said he didn't think so, that he liked it there. His father said it wasn't his time. He felt a tug in his chest that seemed to come from behind him, and he was pulled and he was in his body again. He opened his eyes, and the doctor, doing compressions, startled and pulled her head back. And then he was standing in front of his father again. His father said, "You really don't get it. You have to go back." And then he said, "Look, this is what we're going to do. What they worked out, Jose calls a deal in heaven." His father told him that when it was his time, he'd come and get him himself. Jose accepted, and he went back. Which returns us to the dying brain. It's real, and it explains a great deal. The tunnel, the light, the flood of feeling, all of it sits comfortably inside a brain in its last minutes. Where the explanation strains is the corner of the room. Hernandez is one of a large and growing number of people, documented across decades of medical literature, who report leaving the body and then give an account of what happened in the room while they were, by every clinical measure, unconscious. A brain starved of oxygen can manufacture a vision. It has a harder time manufacturing a correct account of events it had no way to see. Reasonable people land on both sides of this, and the question isn't closed. What isn't in question is what the man came back as. He left engineering, he took up art, and he began speaking publicly about what happened to him, which is how any of this is known at all. He'd spent his whole life inside a rule that said a man doesn't ask for help. It's the rule that kept his hand off that call button for 45 minutes while he suffocated, and kept him from asking a stranger to hold his hand while he died. He learned the rule from his father. His father is the one who broke it, on a beach, and sent him home with a promise to come back for him later.